A new MCU film has dropped, and once again, the internet cannot stop talking about it, but this time, it's not for great reasons. I want to spend this video talking about my overall thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, but I also want to spend a good chunk of this video analyzing what I think this film means to the MCU, not just as a franchise, but to the entire movie industry and as a culture. So stick around for that second half, but let's start by talking why I wasn't crazy about this film. The plot on IMDb says, Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne, along with Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne, explore the quantum realm where they interact with strange creatures and embark on an adventure that goes beyond the limits of what they thought was possible. This is the third Ant-Man film directed by Peyton Reed, so technically we do have a trilogy, but like many Marvel movies at this point, it feels like the plot goes beyond his character and really just serves as another film within the MCU franchise. I certainly feel like this film is weakened in some ways by not giving a full arc to the characters within the title of this film. And I realize that this is a constant critique I have, and it's almost useless to say at this point because the MCU isn't going to stop this trend, and there are plenty of people who enjoy this new way of building a franchise. This film really needs to be viewed as an entry into an episodic plot rather than this standalone story, which might explain why the solo writer of this script has never worked in film before and has only written for TV. The effects of this overstuffed script allows almost no character development in any of the leads and is more interested in setting up future ideas that may potentially be paid off in future projects. Now, this isn't the first time an MCU film has relied more on world building and less about character stories. The problem is, with a film that's so dependent on the world building of the quantum realm, it feels very unimaginative. A lot of the designs just look flat and dull and kind of boring and things we've all seen before in other films. And it's not surprising seeing how many reports there have been, not just with this film, but with the entire MCU, of a lot of the artists being rushed and forced to meet unrealistic deadlines, and even this film needing to do reshoots and touch-ups even weeks before it being released. There is some good in this film, though, and like many people have written on the internet in tweets or angry TikToks, Jonathan Majors really is the standout performance in this film. Now, I'm probably going to half agree with that because Majors does sell his performance and goes beyond what is necessary for a movie like this, and there's definitely major potential for him moving forward, granted the franchise learns how to use him properly. But that's where my main complaint comes in, is that as of now, I don't find the character of Kang particularly interesting. The whole purpose of this movie feels like it was meant to be a setup and introduction to his character. However, the only introduction we get is through dialogue and flashbacks. The exposition in this film is really heavy, and unfortunately, most of the interesting parts of his story are told instead of shown to us. It's also hard to feel any real stakes in this film because moving forward, we know the future of the MCU and especially where Kang is going to go. So when watching this movie, we're well aware there's no consequences for his character. It feels similar to watching Infinity War, knowing that it's going to be a Black Panther sequel, and when we all went to go see Endgame, we had already seen the trailer for the next Spider-Man movie. I understand that this is more a problem of online discourse and movie culture as a whole and marketing and all these elements that the MCU can't really control, but I do have to acknowledge that that does affect me as a viewer watching this film already knowing how it's going to end. So what does this film mean to the MCU as a whole? I know I gave a lot of critiques there, but this is far from the worst Marvel movie I've ever seen. And I know that MCU haters are just having the week of their lives, high-fiving each other, saying they won, they beat the MCU. But trust me, this is not even close to being the worst movie of this year. And if you think it is, you're honestly just not watching enough movies. I think part of the reason that this movie is getting so criticized is because for years now, most of the last decade, the MCU has been a staple for casual movie-going audiences and has become the thing that everyone has to go see. It's water cooler talk. You have to go see the MCU movie so you can talk about it the next week and keep up with what the internet is saying. This film made $100 million this weekend. That's really big for a February release, so people are still watching these movies. That being said, in my experience, there were a lot of people I knew personally that skipped this one, either based on the trailer or because they didn't really like the concept or where the MCU was going. Let me put it this way. I saw this movie completely alone. And yes, 90% of the movies I see in theaters are solo, but I have never seen an MCU movie by myself. Most of the people I asked to see it either wanted to wait until Disney Plus, or they explained that they couldn't watch this because they hadn't watched Loki yet. There was a variety of reasons why people didn't want to see it, but I do think this may mark the beginning of casual, broad public movie audiences removing themselves from going to every single MCU film. There aren't many films or franchises that can still have this effect where everyone sees it. I think Star Wars is up there. In recent years, we've had Top Gun and Avatar. But it only happens once or twice a year where there is a movie that feels like everyone has seen. Now, maybe part of the reason is people feel like they can't keep up. I mean, there's like 4 or 5 movies every single year on top of 3 to 4 series on Disney Plus you have to watch. And the more interconnected it is, the more important that each each one of them are in order to understand the future films. The shows were a hit and were that weekly discussion, like WandaVision or Loki, but a lot of people have dropped off and not even checked out Miss Marvel or Moon Knight. And I think my point with all of this is that I think this is a great thing for the MCU. I think the more that the MCU wants to take these chances with these big ideas or these other worlds, they're going to need this healthy separation from the broad public audience. If you're annoyed with how complicated it is and how many things you have to watch to keep up, I think now's your chance to get out. There's clearly still an audience for this type of filmmaking and the way that this franchise approaches films, and so I think it's good to separate those who want to keep up and those who maybe want to move on to something else. I think the best example of a franchise that does this well is Star Trek. There are so many movies, so many shows, and let me tell you, not all of them are good, and even the most diehard Star Trek fans would agree that they're not all quality. But compare that to a franchise like Star Wars, where everything that is dropped is overanalyzed to the point where the fans themselves don't even like it anymore. If you can create a franchise that serves its audience, you're allowed to take more chances. When you make a project that is less than ideal and the fans don't enjoy it as much, well, you're not on the big stage. You're not that water cooler talk, and I think that's the direction that the MCU needs to go, or it's going to continue to be overly criticized. I can see Guardians 3 still doing numbers this year because people still are attached to those characters, but beyond that, I'm very interested to see how people attach themselves to the MCU moving forward. So those are my overall thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and my brief observation of what I think is going on with the MCU. You may agree or disagree, but I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on the matter. So comment below, have you seen Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania? What do you think? Where do you think the direction of the MCU is going? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you next time.